All right. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming this afternoon. It says on the sheet I'm supposed to say this at the end, but I'm going to say it at the beginning, because if I wait till the end, there is no way I will remember it. You're encouraged to rate this talk on the application, on the DataWorks Summit app, if you'd like to, afterwards. So there's a place to do that, give feedback on whether this was useful, great, wonderful, or otherwise. Okay, so this isn't a talk on the Apache Way. I'm Alan Gates. I'm one of the founders of Hortonworks, but I'm actually here talking now much more as a member of the Apache Software Foundation. I've been involved in Apache for 10 plus, yeah, right at 10 years now. And involved in a number of ways. I started out, my first Apache project was actually Pig. I was part of the team at Yahoo that took that out of research, turned it into a production product, and then we took it to the Apache Incubator. That was my first Apache project. I've since worked on Hive. I'm also part of the Incubator, which is the group that brings new projects into Apache, so I get to mentor a lot of new projects in the Apache Way. So the purpose of this talk is to talk about Apache and how it works. When you come to Apache projects, it's a little bit different. Even if you've done open source before, Apache does it its own way. It's a little bit different than some other open source. If you're coming from a background of proprietary software, where a company pays you to work on their stuff, it's their software, nobody else gets to see it, it's very different. I remember the transition process that I went through when I first started working on Pig was big. It was a complete change. I'd been writing software for 15 years or something at that point. I'd never ever written it for open source. So I want to talk a little bit about what that's like, how Apache works, what it is, and what it values. So I'm going to start at the very beginning. So some of the intro to the talk may seem like I'm saying ABC 1, 2, 3. So if you know the part I start with, please hold on. It'll hopefully get more in depth as we go, but I wanted to start at the beginning just to make sure everybody can get on board. So what is Apache? It's a nonprofit foundation that manages open source software projects. It's actually created specifically to build software for the common good. It is almost completely done by volunteers. It has a handful of paid positions, mostly infrastructure people, the one executive admin. That's about it. Everybody else, including all the people who run the projects, the board of Apache, it's all volunteer. It's broken up into a set of what are called top-level projects, or inside the system we call them TLPs, about 180 as of last month, and they cover all kinds of areas. Many of them fall into the big data space. You've seen probably many of them here at this conference. Many of them fall into the web serving space. That's obviously where Apache first came from with the HTTPD server. Lots of J2E stuff, but then there's other things that don't fit into any of those categories. Each one of these is managed by a project management committee called a PMC. And each community has a fair amount of room to make its own culture and rules. So if you get involved with one community and come to another, you may find that there's some significant differences, and that's okay. Apache stresses community over code. You will hear this over and over again in Apache, and this is really important, and I'll be hitting on this as we go through the talk. Apache doesn't write great software. That's not its goal. Its goal is to create communities that write great software. That's important because you'll see things happen that stress that community aspect of what Apache does. And new projects enter Apache through the incubator. I already referenced this by saying I'm part of the incubator and I help mentor new projects. The point here is to train up new projects in the Apache way. This doesn't mean that the code is new. Sometimes projects that have existed outside of Apache for a long period of time come and join Apache. They may be technically mature, they may have years of code, but they still need to learn the Apache way. An example of this would be the language Groovy. Joined Apache several years ago now. It had already existed for a long time, but it needed to come in and learn how Apache worked. So what are the roles in Apache? What do people do? The first and most important role are the users, the millions of people who download and use Apache software. I'm going to guess that most of you fit at least into that category, even if not any of these others. Then there are contributors, people who contribute to an Apache project. And something, again, I want to hit on this as we go through. This doesn't just mean developers. It's easy to think that contributor means, oh, I write code. There are many things to do in a software project besides just write code. Somebody needs to write tests. Somebody needs to write documentation. Somebody needs to find the bugs and report them. Somebody needs to help users on the mailing list. Somebody needs to have enough legal knowledge to understand what trademark violations are and how to deal with them. There's lots of roles. So please don't think, oh, I don't write code, so I can't help. It's not the case. These first two roles, users and contributors, these are non-official roles. Anybody obviously can be a user. Anybody can contribute. The next set down are kind of official recognized roles. So committers are people who have write permission for the project. There's people who can write code, write documentation. Now, obviously other people can contribute code, but it's the committers who decide whether that gets in, who can commit it. The project management committee I've already referenced. These guys run the project. They determine who the committers are, who the other PMC members are. They're responsible for approving releases, making sure they conform to all of Apache's rules. They report regularly to the board, and all PMC members are by definition also committers. Then there are Apache members. These are people who are shareholders and caretakers of the foundation itself. And I'll talk a little bit later about how you move into some of these roles. And then, of course, there's a board that governs Apache, and the board appoints officers to take care of specific roles like VP of Legal and VP of Trademarks and that kind of stuff. Maybe we'll do it this way. So I said that each project has a fair amount of latitude to make its own rules, its own culture, which is true, but there is a set of things that Apache insists on, and we will call that the Apache Way. And so I want to go through some of those core pieces of the Apache Way. How does Apache set itself up? One of the first and important things is there are no corporate affiliations in Apache. Everyone who works in Apache works as an individual, not as an employer of his or her company. Now, that doesn't mean everybody's a volunteer. I'm paid full-time to work in Apache, as are many of the people you'll run into at this conference. So many of the projects in Apache have full-time paid employees. But when I work in Apache, I am not there as gates@hortonworks.com. I am there as gates@apache.org. I don't have a voice as a Horton worker. I have a voice as a member of the various projects that I'm a part of. Now, this has some interesting side effects for companies that do pay their people to work in open source. It means that they can't tell their employees, here's how to vote, or don't approve that release, we don't like it, or don't let that committer in because he's from the competition and we don't want to let him be on the project. You can't do those sorts of things. You can say, we're going to pay you to work on these features, or these are the things we want you to the bugs we want to fix. You can direct their focus, but you can't tell them how to vote or what else to do in the project. And it also means you can't tell them when you go home tonight, don't work on that other feature that you want to work on. If they want to work on it, I mean, they're an individual, they're free to do that. Now, many companies do sponsor Apache as well. One other point about the companies not having a voice, it means that companies can't imply that they control a project, because they don't. All right, the next point in the Apache Way. Apache's a meritocracy. People are recognized for getting work done, leading by doing rather than by talking. Anybody who's spent some time on the Apache lists might challenge me a little bit on this, because I'll just be honest, people in Apache are pretty good at writing long emails. But there really is value in getting things done and showing, rather than just saying, I think we should do X, saying, I think we should do X, and here's an example of how it would work, or here's a patch that will make that happen. So contributors who consistently make quality contributions and work well with the project would typically be voted in as committers to the project. Again, this doesn't mean you have to be a code writer. You might be a documentation writer. Hive has one PMC member that all she does is write docs. She does it very well. So we wanted to make sure she stayed involved with the project. And again, also I want to point out the works well with. I'm sure all of us in our career have experienced the rock star who's just impossible to get along with, right? He writes great code, but the bugs are never in his code. Anything that's wrong, it's your code, not his, right? Anytime you suggest a fix, it doesn't go in his code. His code's perfect. It's okay that, we don't really want those people in Apache projects. We want people that work well in a community, not people who are Lone Rangers and can't interact well with others. Committers who continue to contribute and who, again, work well and show they can help guide the project would typically be expected to be voted in as PMC members. Now, some projects will make PMC and committer the same group, but many break them out. And then committers and PMC members who consistently contribute across projects will often be voted in as Apache members. And membership is voted on once a year by Apache. The other two, contributors and committers, are voted in by the PMCs of each project. Once merit is earned, it doesn't expire. So if there's a project that I'm not on anymore, that I'm not contributing to a lot anymore, I don't get thrown off the project just because I haven't written a patch for it in 6 months or haven't written an email. Now, I might decide to resign from the project because I haven't done anything, and I have done that in the past for projects that I've helped mentor, for example, and they've grown up, they don't need me there anymore, and I'll resign after a time because it doesn't seem reasonable to stay on. But there's no your merit expired, so you're gone. And merit doesn't transfer. The fact that I'm on the Hive PMC doesn't get me a slot on the Hadoop PMC. If I wanted to be on the Hadoop, well, actually I was on the Hadoop PMC at once in the past, so that's not a good example. If I wanted to be on the Spark PMC, I would have to actually go work in the Spark community and earn that merit there and not just depend on the fact that I had merit somewhere else and they should adopt me. Collaboration. Apache builds these communities across the world, across time zones, across cultures. That means that things need to happen in a way that people that don't sit in the same office, don't live in the same country, may not even spend very many hours awake at the same time in any given day, need to be able to work well together. And the way Apache solves that is with mailing lists. We have a saying, which is if it didn't happen on the list, it didn't happen. So that means the collaboration needs to happen through discussions on the mailing list. Now, of course, discussions are going to happen off mailing lists. Sometimes the person that you're working with sits in the next cube or just down the row in the office. Sometimes you're going to have a get-together of all the project members in your city or at a conference like this. That's completely fine. It's just that it needs to be reported back to the list. And you can't take decisions in those things. You have to report back and say, we talked about this is what we think, what does everybody else think? So that people who aren't physically there can still be part of the discussion and part of the decision. Now, Apache uses a number of tools like Jira, SVN, Git, All those count because those are copied to the mailing list. So those count as being on list discussions. And lists are archived. So every project has a set of lists. They have a dev list where these sort of discussions can take place. Every project has a dev list. And then every project has a private list. Only the PMC are allowed to be on the private list, and Apache members can be on any private list. But the key thing here is that only things that must be private can be private. The private list isn't a place to try out things you're not sure about first on a select audience and then broadcast it out to everybody. The private list is for things like personnel discussions, security problems, legal issues that it's not appropriate to share with the world. And then many projects have a user list for users to come and ask questions. Brand new projects sometimes don't have that. And some projects also add a list for specific things like security issues, to record commits so that they don't dirty their dev list with it, and that kind of stuff. Another part of the consensus is voting. Now, you have to think about voting in the right way here. This isn't voting like, say, the US votes for president or whatever, where 49% vote for one person, 51% vote for the other, and half the people are pissed. Or maybe after a few months, everybody's pissed. That's not the way that's not what votes are for. They aren't here as a way to force things. The goal in Apache is to reach consensus. You want to spend time working till everybody agrees, or at least quits disagreeing. and then use the vote to formalize that. In all my 10 years at Apache, I've only once had a vote where I overrode somebody's veto. And it took a fair amount of diplomacy afterwards to patch that up. So it's not something you want to do. It's not the way Apache works. So the votes, I mean, you say +1 to, say you agree with something. That means not just yes, I agree, but I'm willing to help make this happen. +0 is, yeah, I'm in agreement, but I'm unable or unwilling to help. You can say -0, which means I agree, but I'm not really going to veto it. -1 is a veto or a vote against, and I'll get to different kinds of votes here in a minute. But the key thing here is a -1 vote has to have a reason. It can't just be -1, I don't like it, or I don't like you, or whatever. The disagreement has to be in response to what you're talking about. For example, if you're -1ing somebody's patch, you have to give a reason like, this breaks this test over here, or this isn't going to work well if you have more than one user at a time or something. It has to be a valid technical reason to disagree with this. If you don't, then your veto is void. All votes are equal. There's no hierarchy of, my vote counts for more because I've been around longer than you. And then there are many different votes on different types of decisions. This is not a complete table at all. It's just to give you an idea of kind of how it works here, or some of the options, some of the most common things. So adding a committer or a PMC member, that would be the PMC would have votes on that. It needs to be unanimous. You have to have at least 3 votes. A release is again made by the PMC. That is a majority release, so a -1 here is not a veto, and you can go forward without it. It's generally not wise, again, to do so, but you can. You need a minimum of 3 votes. And then a reviewing patch by other committers does need to be unanimous. A -1 here would block. But depending on the project, you may need no votes for that. Some projects do what's called commit then review, where you just commit it and people can review in the background if they want to. Some do review then commit, where you must get another committer to review it. All the projects I'm on actually use that review then commit. For new projects, that's not such a great idea because it tends to slow down code contributions. But for more mature ones, we've actually found that to be very useful as a way to catch issues up front. I mean, it's just like code reviews in any other software development. So a question I get asked a lot by people, especially coming from a proprietary software background, is who decides what gets done? Who's in charge, basically? This is very different. In a proprietary software development, there's some manager somewhere that says, thou shalt do this, right? This is what you're going to work on. In Apache, it's kind of almost organized anarchy by design. Not quite, but almost. But by design, no one's in charge. We actually explicitly outlaw what are called BDFLs, benevolent dictators for life. So in some open source communities, there is a person that decides whether things happen or not, right? In the Linux world, if Linus doesn't like a patch, that patch doesn't go in the kernel. And I'm not saying that's good or bad, but it is the way they run the project. Apache does not work that way. So in Apache, each contributor works on what he or she wants to work on. So everyone scratches their own itches. Now, does this mean the projects go in all kinds of different directions? To some degree, yes. Now, it doesn't mean you can do crazy stuff. If someone turned up and said, hey, we think we should turn Hadoop into a giant app server, it would be perfectly valid to say, no, -1. Hadoop is not an app server, right? That's just not what it is. It's valid to block a patch if it doesn't work, it's not ready or it doesn't work, breaks tests, if it breaks other things in the project, but not because you don't care about that feature, right? And let me give you a concrete example of how this happens. In the Hive project years ago, when we decided it was time to move Hive off MapReduce, a group of us, mostly from Hortonworks, thought that the right solution was to put Hive on top of Tez. So we started working on that. Another group, mostly from Cloudera, came along and looked at that and said, that's a stupid idea. We should put Hive on Spark. And so they started working on that. And the other group looked at their work and said, that's stupid. We should stick with Tez, right? But we didn't get in each other's way. We just let each work on it. And where it made sense, we shared the work of making sure you could easily switch the engines in and out, so you can do whatever. Neither were excited about the other's work, but neither got in the way of the other one. And that's the way this works. You cooperate and let people scratch their own itches, basically. All right. How am I doing on time? I've got lots of time. Good. Okay, so I'll drag you through just a little bit of legalese let's just talk about licenses for a second. All Apache projects do have to use the Apache license. The Apache license is corporate friendly because you as a user, when you take Apache licensed software, you can copy that software, you can repackage it, you can even resell it. That's completely fine. As we'll talk about in a moment, the names are trademarks, so you can't resell it under the name, but if you want to take Apache software, add your own special modules and sell it as my best ever software product, perfectly fine. That's all legal by the Apache license. Not all open source licenses work like this. Some are what are called copyleft, where any changes or additions you make need to go back into the open source. This is why we say that Apache's license is very corporate friendly. It doesn't require this. Companies like that. And another huge thing here is the Apache license doesn't mean Apache software. The license is as open source as everything else in Apache, so you can use the Apache license for your software even if you are not an Apache project. An example of this would be Druid, which is an open source project you might have heard about this week. They are not an Apache project, but they do use the Apache license, and there are many, many instances of this. A little more legalese goop. So trademarks. Some of Apache's projects' names are registered trademarks, such as Hadoop. Some aren't, such as Hive and Pig. But Apache still claims those as trademarks, and it does ask that if you talk about these projects, in your first reference to them, call them Apache Hadoop or Apache Spark, so that people know what you're talking about. And once you've established that, it's fine to just call it Hadoop or Spark or whatever. That's just fine. But you can't say things that imply you own, drive, or control an Apache project. So for an example, in my company, we can't say Hortonworks Hadoop. There's no Hortonworks Hadoop. There's Apache Hadoop. We can't say Hortonworks the masters of Hadoop or the Hadoop company. We're not. We don't control it. We don't run it, right? Apache controls and runs it. Now you can brag all you want to the world about how you have the most contributors, the best, the smartest, the nicest. It's all fine. Or how you support it better than anybody else. You understand it better than anybody else. Fine. But you can't imply that you run, control the project or that you are the project. So why Apache? Why would people choose to do things this way? So the answer to this question is obviously going to depend a little bit on where you come from. So this answer is from my perspective, having been inside Hortonworks. So you might answer this question a little differently, but I can tell you how we answer the question, why do we go with Apache in Hortonworks? Now, obviously, some of the answer is historical because things like Hadoop and Spark were already in Apache when we got started, but we have chosen to stay with Apache. We have helped start a number of Apache projects, and when third parties have come to us and said, hey, we'd like to do some open source stuff, we often recommend Apache as the right approach. Why is that? What do we think is good about it? One big thing is that Apache is a known and respected brand, right? When we talk to other people, other developers, customers, partners, whoever, and we say Apache, nobody says who or what. That's important, right? They're developing in open source owned by a third party, gives developers and users confidence in the longevity and availability of the software. This is key where it says owned by a third party, right? You can open source stuff by just putting it on your company's GitHub. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. It might be an appropriate thing in some cases. But if your company dies or gets sold or pivots or whatever, who knows what happens to that software? In Apache, when you're building a community around it, you've got some guarantees as to that community living on. One of the big reasons we at Hortonworks have been very happy with Apache and have continued to pursue it is we believe that putting code in open source in a trusted place like Apache is a huge market accelerator for us. Think for a moment if Yahoo had kept Hadoop development internal to itself, especially given this week with Yahoo's, the acquisition of Yahoo's assets by Verizon. I don't think we would be here. I'm certain I wouldn't be here since I worked for them at the time. So getting that out in the open where other people can play with it, where other people can contribute to it, is a huge accelerator for market adoption. And then working in Apache allows developers to collaborate with customers, partners, even competitors. This is the only job I've ever had where customers have sent me bug fixes. It's amazing to get paid to take somebody's code where they fixed your bug for you, and all you have to do is commit it. It's pretty nice. Now, not that that happens all the time, but that's what this model enables. Right? So, should you let your employees contribute to Apache? I can't answer that question for you. That's a question you can only answer for yourself. But some thoughts if you do decide to do that. It is a big benefit for your employees to be able to participate in these open source communities. It gives them a chance to be recognized outside your company. Before I started working on Hadoop, I had spoken at precisely 0 conferences anywhere. Since I started on Hadoop, not just at Hortonworks, but even at Yahoo, I have spoken at conferences in 4 different continents, and I've lost track of time. I mean, how many times, right? Being able to participate outside my company with these other groups has been great for me and all my colleagues who are working on this and can get that exposure. It's a chance to work with great people from all over the world. I don't work just with my own coworkers inside Hortonworks. I work with a whole community of people all over the world on these kind of things. And for a lot of people, open source is very attractive, and so it can help you attract and retain talent. As I already said, it benefits your company by being able to collaborate well with your customers, your partners, and your competitors. Now, what's the flip side? What do you need to know about? As I said before, your employees will be required to act as individuals inside Apache, so know that. You're not going to be able to tell them, block that committer, block that release, go +1 my patch because I like it. You can ask them to go vote on your patch, you can ask them to go review it, but you can't tell them to +1 it, right? So you need to know that you're giving up some measure of control there that you would have had otherwise. Also know that there is what we call the open source tax. If your employees become committers or PMC members, they will need to spend a little bit of time reviewing other people's patches, answering questions on the mailing list, reviewing releases and voting on them. This isn't huge or excessive. It's not like you're going to burn half their time on this. I have a goal of trying to make sure I review a patch or answer email or something once a day in the project, in like the Hive project. I just want to be upfront and confess that I don't make that goal all the time. But so I'm looking at spending 15 to 30 minutes on it in a day. Not tons and tons of time, but a little bit. And I think in general you get more than that back from the collaboration with others, but you just need to know that that's something you're going to have to put in your schedules. All right, so I think I have about 10 minutes left, about 12. That's all the content I had. Questions, comments, and I think we have a mic back here for the questions. Maybe?
So you said when you...
Go ahead, I'll just repeat it.
Okay, so when you commit code, so you don't use your Hortonworks email address, you use Apache. So how can you definitively say how many contributors from Hortonworks have committed to a project?
Okay, so the question is, when you commit, you don't use your Hortonworks address, you use your Apache one. So just to be clear, you could have your Apache mail go to I could have my Apache mail go to my Hortonworks address. I just don't happen to. But the point is valid. How do you know who, when you see these graphs about I have X number of committers and the competition only has Y, how do you know? LinkedIn is a wonderful thing, really. The honest thing is, like, when you register with Apache, you don't have to say who you work for. There are people who don't work for anybody. The committer counts are mostly people going and looking at that list and then going to LinkedIn and going, okay, Hortonworks, Cloudera, Hortonworks, IBM, like that, right? But there's no official mapping of it.
One more question.
Okay.
How many people have contributed to the Hadoop project?
So how many people have contributed to the Hadoop project?
Approximately.
Over 100 and under 1,000. That would be my guess. I don't know. Are there any Hadoop people in here that can answer that question better of a rough number of like actual distinct contributors? Because I honestly don't know without going and doing a git log and some kind of count. But git log pipe through, grep on author pipe through, sort unique count would give you pretty quickly at least a decent estimate on the number. But it's, for many projects, it's in the hundreds. I know in Hive, we have like 60 some committers, but hundreds and hundreds of individual contributors over the course of the project. Okay, yes?
What programming language do you commit to?
What programming language? Different projects use different things. For example, Hive, Hadoop, Spark, well, not Spark, sorry. Hive, Hadoop are written in Java, Spark's written in Scala, Impala is written in C++. There are things that are all JavaScript frameworks. It's very variable. I've seen an analysis, and something like, I think it's around 50% or more of the projects at Apache are Java-based, and then the next ones are, I believe, like C++, and I don't remember what's after that. But that's completely up to the community, and in many communities, they have pieces written in different languages. So, other questions?
Hi. How would a relative newcomer go about contributing to a project and getting involved?
Okay, that's a great question. I actually should have a slide on that. Like, how do you get started? So, two things. First, subscribe to the mailing list. That's step one. That's the lifeblood of the project and the communication network. Then the next thing I would say is pick something small you want to do. Some projects in their whatever their bug tracking system is, Jira for most of them, will have a tag called newbie or new person or something like that. You can go find yourself a Jira like that. Can be a good place to get started. If not, you may need to do a little more looking, but find some small trivial bug and fix it and put in a patch. If code is what you want to do. If you want to do documentation, find something in the documentation that needs improvement, whatever the area you want to work on. Or maybe propose a small feature. Now, how do you propose that first feature? You have some great idea, you look at it and you're like, the system is awesome, but it just doesn't do this one little thing. Start by proposing that on the mailing list. Some projects will just discuss it on the list and then have you go do it. Some will ask you to post a Jira where you just kind of walk through how you want to implement it. Then you can post the patch and work through it again, and that might apply to, you might be writing new documentation. You might say, hey, we need to document this, and here's an outline of how I propose to do that. How's that look? But that's really the key. Find something that interests you and start small. Don't show up and say, I'm going to redesign your entire transaction system. You're probably not going to win any friends. Okay, over here. Oh, okay. We'll get there, but no problem.
What's the number one reason that projects fork?
Human nature. Why would projects fork? Well, sometimes people want to take things different directions, right? They have different goals of where things should go. Sometimes people just prefer to go do their own thing, I guess. And that's kind of a hard question to answer. Let me say a couple things around it, though. One is Apache is fine with having competing projects that do similar things, right? If you look at SQL engines or streaming engines for big data, I have no idea how many Apache has, but plenty. And that's fine. Even things like Accumulo was a fork of HBase that went off for a while and then came back. Again, it's fine. The one thing Apache will not take is hostile forks. So if you said to the rest of the community, screw you, I'm going to go do my own thing, and the community that you're forking from said, wait, but we'll work with you, then Apache's not going to take that. They don't want to get in the middle of a civil war, basically. But if you just said, we want to take it this other direction, we want to add these other features, that's fine. I don't know if I answered the question or not, but anyway, there's... We'll get there.
Off of the gentleman's question about getting started. Do you know if different projects have kind of a role of almost like ambassador, or sort of what they do is partially like helping people get involved with the project?
Is there a role in the project for ambassadors, for people who help people get started? In the incubator, there's a formal role for that. It's called a mentor. It's called the mentors. I mean, that's what, when I was saying I work with the incubator, that's what we do. And there's, lots of mentors inside the incubator. In a project itself, I don't know that that's a formalized role, but I've certainly seen people play that role, the same as in any company or organization. You may not formalize the mentor role, but you'll see people playing that. It's definitely a very valuable position. And if you want to get involved in a project, I don't think you should shy away from going to somebody you know in that project and saying, hey, I'd like to get involved, can you help me? That's a very reasonable question, thing to ask. Okay, you've been waiting patiently.
Yeah, I wanted to know more about I wanted to know more about the incubator. You just started down that route. So how does a project get into one? How does it graduate? Do projects sometimes not graduate? What happens inside?
Okay.
Just more detail.
Sure. So how do you get in to start? You bring a proposal. The important thing is you need to have a community of at least 3 people when you come. It can't be just you with an idea. The other thing is you really, really want to have at least the beginnings of an implementation, not slideware. So showing up with we have this grand vision. It's much better to have started on that vision with your small team and bring that into the incubator. Then you write a proposal. You need to find a champion. That's somebody who's already an Apache member that has agreed with you that what you're doing should become an Apache project, and they will help you through the process then. Once you've found a champion, you put your proposal up, you'll start looking for mentors in the incubator, and the incubator will then vote on and may give feedback on your project. They may ask you to questions or push you to change certain things, whatever. Assuming you get voted in, the big things in the incubator they want you to learn are they're not trying to teach you technical stuff. They assume you know the technical stuff. What they're trying to teach you is the Apache Way and the legal requirements for a release. Apache is legally responsible for the code it ships, right? So they have to teach you certain things about licenses and all that kind of stuff. So what they want to see is community building. Have you added new people to the project as you've gone along? And releases. Do you know how to release your software properly? Once you've proved you can do those things, usually, I don't know that I've seen a project do it in less than 6 months, and they encourage you to do it in, 1 to 2, in under 2 years, certainly, maybe even under 1 year. Then the incubator would vote on you graduating. And there are projects that don't vote. They fail to construct a community, or maybe people wander off and get interested in something else, and those just get retired from the incubator. Also projects, even top-level projects can eventually be retired, right? Things age out, and then they go to what's called the attic, where the code is stored, but there's no further development. Okay. Other questions? Uh-oh, clear over here now. Sorry.
Okay, no.
Make you run.
Is there a general process for testing that's the Apache way, or is it every project handles it differently?
Every project handles their testing differently. It's completely up to them. So, you'll certainly see patterns of some people, like one particular method. Even development methods, agile versus, well, some of that's a little different because of being in the Apache stuff. But, how many tests are you adding? How thoroughly are you testing? What areas are you testing? All that's very up to the project. All right. Looks like that's it. I'll hang around here. Oh, sorry, wait. There is one more question. Okay.
Can someone add a code to an Apache project if that code has dependencies on a non-Apache project?
Yes, sort of. Well, maybe actually is a better answer. Every project I've worked on that's larger than 10 lines of code depends on some other library or something, right? That's completely fine. For example, I think every project I work on depends on Guava, Google's library. That's, if I remember correctly, I don't remember actually off the top of my head if that's a BSD license or an Apache license. But there are other licenses beyond just the Apache one that are compatible. some of the BSD license, MIT ones. Now, Apache cannot depend on GPL code because of that viral nature of GPL. So you couldn't pull in a library that's GPL, for example. But you can, it's completely fine to pull in non-Apache pieces as long as the licensing is compatible. And if you ever go through the incubator process, that's part of what you'll learn of how you pull those in and how you, because the project needs to document that and give a list to people of here's all the libraries we pull in and here's the licenses they come under and that you're now also subject to.
Yeah, Guava was the one I had in mind.
Yeah, we all use Guava. 3 different versions of it if we can. Okay.
Which project has had the highest number of contributors or has gone the fastest from being an incubator to top level?
Which has been the highest number of contributors or has gone fastest? I have no idea on either one. I really don't know. Like, I can tell you some of the fastest I've mentored. I think the fastest one I ever mentored was Apache Flink, but that doesn't mean that it's the fastest by any means, because there may have been others that were faster. And as far as most number of committers, that's something you'd have to go, Apache, you can go to phonebook.apache.org and type in the, what? OpenOffice and Hadoop says they have the most committers. Are you counting back there on the phone book, or are you? Oh, you know off the top of your head. Okay. I didn't know if it was a Hadoop or Spark. Okay. And I'd forgotten about OpenOffice. But you can go to phonebook.apache.org. You can look at who all the committers are, who all the PMC members are for everything. Okay. I'm getting the out of time sign, so thank you all very much. And I'll stick around if you have questions.